This is Devlog 3 for the Burden of the Observer, a game about moral philosophy. I'm showing Minecraft footage right now because this devlog is more about the ideas behind the game than it is about showing the gameplay itself. I don't have all of these systems in place yet. This week I'm going to talk about the main gameplay loop. The goal of the game is to both teach the player the basics of many ethical theories and to get the player to solve for themselves some interesting moral problems. To do this, text-based dialogue is my greatest tool. The game will be reminiscent of classic 2D RPGs like Final Fantasy, but it'll incorporate branching dialogue and remove the combat. I've never found combat fun in games, and it obviously conflicts with the moral questions being posed. In addition to text-based explicit choices, the player will be offered implicit choices. By implicit, I mean that the player will be able to affect the dialogue with any action. If the action is morally inconsequential, it won't have any effect. But if the action does matter morally, the NPCs will respond accordingly. Obviously, what is morally consequential or not is up for debate, so this will require a lot of testing. There are many ethical concepts I would like to teach, and most of them build upon other concepts, so it is important to teach them in order. It is also important to separate them. At least in the beginning, the easiest way to grasp a concept is to view it in the simplest manner possible. This means it's better to teach a single concept at a time. To do this, I'm going to structure the story into a series of days. A new day, a new concept. The order of the concepts is going to be taken from the textbook The Elements of Moral Philosophy by James and Stuart Rachels, though I'm going to exclude the final chapter. This is the standard introductory ethics textbooks for undergrads. Link in the description. Actually teaching these concepts is going to be the most difficult part. I need to get the player to accept that they are probably wrong and no one has the answers. Then I need them to still be invested enough to think hard about the problems and ideas presented to them. The reason any philosophy is still philosophy is because humanity has yet to make enough progress in the subject to say anything substantial. Aside from the minimum conception, which is a single thought, the best I can give the player are some ideas which seem close to being correct, but still have major flaws. Despite all of the ideas I can present being wrong, they are still transformative to think about. Thus, they are important, and I need the player to recognize this. To do this, I'm going to take a technique from the YouTube channel Veritasium. Derek Muller of Veritasium did his PhD on how to teach physics through video. He found it was essential that common incorrect ideas were presented and disproven in the video. If these incorrect ideas weren't discussed in the video, the viewers were likely to believe that the video was saying what they already thought. I'm going to attempt to do the same thing in the game. Each day will start out with a smaller, less consequential problem posed to the player. After the player responds, the game will discuss how a modern-day philosopher, ascribing to a specific moral theory, would try to assess the problem, and why this assessment is different from the player's assessment, assuming they are different. Finally, the player will be presented with a much more consequential moral problem, which deals with the same concept. There are some differences between this and what Veritasium does. Elementary physics has a single correct answer, while ethics often doesn't. And the physics videos have to address many common initial ideas, while I am able to target the specific idea the player holds. I think this will be a powerful system, as long as I play to the strengths of the medium. This isn't the only system that will be in the game. Just discussing philosophy will be a bit boring to most people, so I'm going to wrap everything up in an overarching story. Doing this has the tendency to lead to some pretty bad stories, so I'm going to make certain the characters' actions actually make sense in relation to the entire story. If I successfully do this, the philosophy will lend itself well to making interesting characters and character progression. Given that good characters are most of what you need to write a good story, and I already have an outline which I like, I'm feeling pretty confident about it. Additionally, there need to be other things for the player to do. This will act to give the player a breather from philosophy, but it's also necessary so that the player can be given implicit choices. I don't know all of the details for these additional systems yet, but I will be talking about them in next week's devlog. Lastly, there are definitely going to be a fair amount of puzzles, because I like puzzles. I'm especially a fan of the strength and ice puzzles from Pokemon, so I will be making harder versions of those. There weren't any questions this week. If you have any for next week, ask them in the comments. Also, I'm not using XML Spy for the dialogue anymore. If you haven't seen Devlog 2, I was able to infinitely reuse their free trial. While I don't think my actions were morally wrong, because it cost £800 and is proprietary software meant to be sold to businesses, I still felt guilty doing it, so I stopped. You can expect a devlog on what I'm doing instead in the future.